The pen touches the paper at 2:14 p.m. in the Oval Office. The ink dries on the executive order. And 3,000 miles away, a locking mechanism engages on a glass door in a suburban strip mall. These two events appear unrelated on the surface. They are separated by geography, by industry, and by scale. But they are part of the same hydraulic system. One valve opens, another valve closes. Pressure is not created, it is transferred. And what is being transferred today is not just capital, it is viability. The American economic engine has bifurcated. It is no longer a single organism growing or shrinking in unison. It has split into two distinct, counter-rotating gears. The first gear is the state-sponsored extraction economy fueled by the recent seizure of Venezuelan assets, protected by the military, and codified by the January 9th emergency declaration. This gear is accelerating. It turns with the friction-free speed of government fiat. The second gear is the consumer real economy, the brick-and-mortar landscape of Main Street. This gear is seizing up. It is grinding against the realities of a hollowed-out middle class and a digital exodus. And the noise it makes is not a scream. It is the silence of a liquidation sale. At the Department of the Treasury, the lights in the Office of Foreign Assets Control do not turn off. The staff there are not monitoring stock prices. They are monitoring tanker transponders. The executive order signed by the president has reclassified the revenue streams of a foreign nation as a matter of domestic national security. This is a legal alchemy that transforms crude oil into sovereign collateral. The objective is clear. The administration requires a new liquidity injection to mask the structural rot of the domestic market. They have found it in the Orinoco Belt. The strategy is resource imperialism, a term usually reserved for historians describing the 19th century. Now it is a memo on a desk in Washington. By declaring a national emergency regarding Venezuelan assets, the executive branch has bypassed the messy inefficiency of congressional appropriation. They have secured a direct line of credit, underpinned by 50 million barrels of heavy crude. This capital does not flow through the hands of consumers. It flows through the hands of contractors, refineries, and special-purpose vehicles managed by the state. It is a closed loop, a circuit of power that feeds itself. Meanwhile, the circuit on the ground is breaking. GameStop is not just a store, it is a sensor. It measures the disposable income of the American male demographic aged 18 to 35. And that sensor has gone dark. The announcement of 400 store closures in January 2026 is not a business adjustment. It is an amputation. It brings the total number of terminated locations to nearly 1,000 inches, 2 fiscal years. The corridors of these malls are becoming mausoleums of commerce. But the closure of a store is a complex procedural event. It involves the termination of commercial leases, the liquidation of inventory algorithms, and the deletion of labor units. There is no sentimentality in the boardroom of GameStop. The logic driving these closures is mathematical. The revenue per square foot has fallen below the cost of occupancy. The equation dictates the outcome. But there is a second equation at work, one that reveals the true nature of this economic bifurcation. While the physical footprint of the company dissolves, the financial architecture at the top expands. The CEO, Ryan Cohen, stands to trigger a compensation package valued at $35 billion if certain market capitalization targets are met. This is the paradox of the modern American economy. The value of the corporation has decoupled from the viability of its operations. The stock price is no longer a reflection of how many video games are sold to teenagers in Ohio. It is a reflection of how effectively the company can financialize its own decline. The layoffs of thousands of employees are not a failure of the model. They are the fuel for the model. Each closed store reduces overhead. Each fired worker increases the earnings per share. The stock goes up. The payout triggers. The wealth concentrates. And the state approves. Because the state needs the stock market to remain buoyant. The administration knows that the actual economy, the exchange of goods and services for wages, is in recession. But they cannot allow the perceived economy, the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, to reflect that reality. So they allow the cannibalization of the retail sector. They allow Macy's to shutter its doors and retreat into the digital channel, a euphemism for a warehouse with robots. They allow the Main Street storefronts to empty out, leaving behind a landscape of for-lease signs and cracked pavement. To offset the visual of this domestic decay, the administration creates a spectacle of foreign conquest. The seizure of Venezuelan oil is the distraction. It provides the cheap energy necessary to keep the logistics network running. It lowers the price of gas at the pump, a crude subsidy to the very citizens whose jobs are being deleted. It is a cynical calculation. The voter may lose their employment at the mall, but they will pay 50 cents less for a gallon of fuel to drive home. The administration is betting that the latter will pacify the anger of the former. The mechanism of this transfer is visible in the architecture of the deals being cut in Washington. Senators Hawley and Young did not flip their votes on the War Powers Resolution because of a newfound respect for executive authority. They flipped because they were shown the blueprints. The refineries in the Midwest in their districts are designed to process heavy Venezuelan crude. Without it, those refineries idle. If the refineries idle, the regional economy contracts. The president offered them a choice. Stand on constitutional principle and watch your state's industrial base rust, or authorize the seizure and watch the factories hum. They chose the factories. They chose the oil. They chose to feed the state gear at the expense of the constitutional gear. This transaction turns the Senate into a commodities exchange. The vote was not a legislative act, it was a futures contract. And the currency was not dollars, but authority. By validating the emergency declaration, the legislative branch has effectively privatized the war-making power. They have handed the keys of the military to the executive, who now uses the armed forces not just for defense, but for acquisition. The military becomes the enforcement arm of the Treasury. The soldier becomes an asset manager. In the boardrooms of New York, this new reality is understood perfectly. The CEOs of the major retail chains are not asking for a bailout. They know none is coming. The government's resources are allocated to the energy sector, to the defense contractors, to the industries that project power outward. Retail is an industry that projects weakness inward. It reveals the decline of purchasing power. It reveals the fragility of the household balance sheet. So it must be allowed to fail, quietly, incrementally. Macy's announcement is a concession of defeat. The department store was once the anchor of the American community. It was the physical manifestation of the middle class. Its contraction is the physical manifestation of the hollowing out of that class. The shift to digital is a retreat from the public square. It removes the friction of human interaction. It turns consumption into a solitary act, performed on a screen, fulfilled by a drone. It eliminates the need for the clerk, the manager, the janitor. It strips the transaction of its social component and leaves only the data point. And data is what Washington craves. The deep state, if one chooses to use the term, is not a shadowy cabal of spies. It is a bureaucracy of accountants and risk managers. And right now, their risk models are flashing red. They see the collapse of the retail tax base. They see the rise in commercial real estate defaults. They know that the banking sector is exposed to these empty malls. If GameStop and Macy's default on their leases, the regional banks that hold the mortgages on those properties will wobble. If the regional banks wobble, the financial crisis of 2026 begins. So the oil must flow. The revenue from the seized Venezuelan assets is not just for political slush funds, it is a desperate liquidity buffer. The administration plans to use the managed distribution of these funds to plug the holes in the domestic dike. They will call it stabilization. They will call it reinvestment. But in practice, it is a cross-subsidy. The profits from the imperial venture are being used to bail out the failures of the domestic economy. It is a transfer of wealth from the conquered periphery to the rotting core. This is the economic dichotomy in its rawest form. One hand constructs an empire abroad, the other hand manages a demolition at home, and the citizen is caught in between. They are no longer the engine of the economy, they are merely the passenger. And the vehicle is being driven by men who have decided that the preservation of the system is worth the destruction of its components. The Executive Order 14099 is the operating manual for this new machine. Its language is sterile, blocking property, prohibiting transactions, national emergency, but the effect is kinetic. It authorizes the freezing of assets, yes, but it also authorizes the direction of those assets. It gives the president the power to decide who gets paid and who does not. In a free market, the market decides. In a command economy, which is what this sector has become, the commander-in-chief decides. The legal teams at ExxonMobil and Chevron are currently working in 24-hour shifts. They are drafting the contracts that will operationalize this order. They are not worried about the morality of the seizure. They are worried about the indemnity clauses. They need assurance that when the regime in Caracas eventually changes, or when the international courts finally rule, their shareholders will not be liable. The administration has given them that assurance. The risk has been nationalized. The profit remains privatized. This is the deal that silenced the Senate. This is the logic that keeps the stock market hovering at record highs while the storefronts board up. It is a separation of financial reality from physical reality. The numbers on the screen say the nation is wealthy. The empty parking lot at the mall says the nation is broke. And the government has decided to believe the screen. The retail apocalypse is therefore not a natural disaster. It is a controlled demolition. It is allowed to happen because the alternative, propping up an obsolete consumption model, is too expensive. The capital is needed elsewhere. It is needed to secure the oil. It is needed to build the drone swarms. It is needed to pay the interest on the debt. The store clerk in Omaha is a casualty of this reallocation. Her job was not optimized. Her labor was not strategic. In the high-rise offices of the hedge funds betting on GameStop, the mood is not one of concern for the closures. It is one of anticipation. The volatility caused by the announcement is an opportunity for arbitrage. The collapse of the physical store is priced in. The payout to the CEO is priced in. The only thing not priced in is the social cost, the anger of the displaced worker, the decay of the local municipality that loses its tax revenue. These are externalities. They do not appear on the balance sheet. But politics is the art of managing externalities, and the president knows that anger must be directed. It cannot be directed at the corporations, for they are the donors. It cannot be directed at the government, for he is the government. So it is directed outward, at the foreign adversaries, at the socialist dictators. The seizure of Venezuela is presented not as a theft, but as a punishment. We are taking their oil because they are bad actors. We are bringing the wealth home to protect the American people. It is a narrative loop that justifies the extraction. We need the oil to save the economy. The economy needs saving because we have hollowed it out. We hollowed it out to maximize efficiency. Efficiency requires the elimination of redundancy. The retail worker is redundant. The oil barrel is essential. This is the cold calculus of January 2026. The machinery of state has determined that a barrel of crude oil located 2,000 miles away is more valuable to the national interest than a retail job located down the street. One is a strategic asset, the other is a legacy cost. And a ruthless architect always cuts costs. As the sun sets over Washington, the lights in the Treasury building remain on. The transfers are being processed. The SWIFT codes are being entered. The ownership of millions of barrels of oil is changing hands in a digital ledger. And in a shopping center in the Midwest, a manager turns the key in the lock for the last time. He tapes a piece of paper to the glass. Store closed. He walks to his car. The gas tank is full. The price was low. The system is working. The silence in the Supreme Court is as deafening as the silence in the empty GameStop storefronts. While the executive branch accelerates its acquisition of foreign assets, the judicial branch has entered a state of paralysis. The docket regarding the President's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs and seize assets remains frozen. The prediction markets, those electronic aggregates of insider sentiment, have tilted toward a ruling that will likely arrive too late to matter. The delay itself is a ruling. It creates a temporal void where the executive operates without a check. In this void, the definition of national emergency expands to fill the available space. This legal vacuum allows for the existence of the financial anomaly known as the GameStop paradox. In a rational market, a company closing 400 stores and terminating thousands of labor units would be a sign of distress. In the current distorted architecture, it is a trigger for enrichment, the mechanism rewarding CEO Ryan Cohen with a potential $35 billion payout is not based on the health of the retail operation. It is based on market capitalization targets. It is a decoupling of the stock price from the underlying asset. The store is merely a husk. The value lies in the financial instrument attached to it. Wall Street has noticed this efficiency. The retail apocalypse is not being viewed as a crisis of employment. It is being viewed as an optimization of capital. The labor force is an expense line that is being deleted to improve the operating margin. The thousands of employees losing their positions are not victims in the eyes of the market. They are inefficiencies that have been corrected. And because the state apparatus is focused entirely on the energy sector, there is no safety net being constructed to catch them. The safety net has been melted down to build pipelines. The connection between the Midwest refineries and the Venezuelan oil fields is the physical manifestation of this new priority. The senators from Indiana and Missouri did not align with the White House for ideological reasons. They aligned because the cracking towers in their districts were built to process heavy crude. The sanctions of the previous era had starved these facilities of their specific feedstock. The Operation Gideon II and the subsequent seizure of the Orinoco assets solved a logistical problem for the heavy industry of the Rust Belt. This is the economic guarantee that secured the tie-breaking vote. It was a transaction of resources. The administration promised a flow of 30 to 50 million barrels of seized oil. The senators promised the suppression of the War Powers Resolution. The Constitution was traded for viscosity. The legislative branch effectively functioned as a procurement department for the energy lobby. Vice President Vance's casting of the deciding vote was the final signature on the bill of lading. The implications of this trade extend beyond the Senate floor. By accepting the managed distribution of these oil revenues, the government has created a parallel budget. The money generated from the sale of this seized oil does not pass through the standard appropriations process. It is held in accounts controlled by the executive under the authority of the emergency declaration. This gives the White House a discretionary fund that sits outside the oversight of Congress. It is a war chest that can be used to reward loyalty or punish dissent. In the corridors of the Department of Energy, the planning for this distribution is already underway. The technocrats are designing a system where the proceeds from the oil sales are used to subsidize fuel costs in strategic electoral districts. This is the pacification strategy. The displaced retail worker may not have a job, but the cost of filling their tank will be artificially suppressed. It is a subsidy for mobility in an economy with nowhere to go. The Macy's contraction further illustrates the withdrawal of the commercial infrastructure. As the department store retreats to the digital channel, the physical tax base of the American municipality collapses. Property taxes on commercial real estate fund the local schools, the police departments, and the road maintenance crews. When the anchor tenant leaves, the assessment value plummets. The revenue stream dries up. The local government enters a fiscal death spiral. Washington has no plan to intervene in this municipal decay. The focus is entirely on the imperial periphery. The resources are being directed to secure the assets in Caracas, not to pave the roads in Cleveland. The administration has made a calculation that the projection of power abroad yields a higher return on investment than the maintenance of stability at home. It is a gamble that assumes the population will accept a lower standard of living in exchange for a resurgence of national pride and cheaper gasoline. The friction between these two economies, the rising imperial state and the falling commercial republic, is generating heat. The protests appearing in cities from Boston to Los Angeles are the early warning indicators of this structural stress. But the administration interprets these protests not as grievances to be addressed, but as friction to be suppressed. The tools used to seize the oil can be turned inward. The language of national emergency is elastic. It can stretch to cover domestic unrest just as easily as it covers foreign assets. Inside the Situation Room, the monitors display the flow of tankers leaving the Venezuelan coast. The operation is considered a success. The vessels of interest are under U.S. control. The revenue is secured. The risk of a price spike has been neutralized. The reports on the desk regarding the collapse of the retail sector are filed away. They are considered secondary data. The primary mission is the consolidation of the energy supply. This prioritization reveals the final shape of the new regime. It is a resource directorate. The government has evolved into a management firm for strategic commodities. The citizen is no longer the client. The citizen is merely the resident of the territory where the firm operates. The rights of the citizen are subordinate to the needs of the firm. If the firm needs to seize a foreign capital to balance the books, it will. If the firm needs to let the domestic market crash to clear the ledger, it will. The retail apocalypse and the Venezuelan intervention are therefore not separate events. They are the twin pillars of the 2026 doctrine. One represents the demolition of the old order, based on consumption and middle-class employment. The other represents the construction of the new order, based on extraction and executive command. The transition is painful. It involves the breaking of leases and the breaking of laws. But the architects of this transition do not care about pain. They care about load-bearing capacity. They have determined that the Constitution, with its checks and balances and its slow, deliberative processes, is structurally unsound for the modern era. It cannot bear the weight of the crises they foresee, so they are installing new supports. They are using the war powers resolution not as a restraint, but as a scaffold to build something else. They are using the emergency powers not as a shield, but as a battering ram. As the ink dries on the ledgers in New York and the orders in Washington, the transformation is codified. The Republic has been retrofitted. It is leaner. It is harder. It is fueled by seized oil and governed by emergency decree. The empty windows of the strip mall reflect the passing headlights of the military convoys. The transfer is complete. Structure dictates function, and the new function of this government is predation.